Section 25 of the Soul or Rational Psychology. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Travis Bissell. Chapter 14, Part 7 of the Soul or Rational Psychology by Emanuel Swedenborg. Translated by Frank Sewall, 1837 to 1915, and others. Section 25. Revenge. 270. Revenge flows from hatred and envy. Hatred indeed is the contrary of love, but it is not the privation of love and thus of life. It is rather a contrary love, and especially a love of the evil. For there is a love of the good and a love of the evil. One is contrary to the other, hence one hates the other. Thus in hatred there is a life, and if life there is also heat and fire, but that which is grosser, more impure, hence natural and corporeal. It resides in the animus and not in the mind, unless the mind be united with the animus of the body. This heat of hatred is called the lust of revenge, and if anger ensues, such as is that of envy, then it becomes fire and vengeance. Thus the lust of revenge is the very fire, the active principle or highest degree of the activity of hatred or of the love of evil. 271. As envy is particular and general, so also is revenge and its lust. Particular envy is natural to all, and is the lust of revenge. Thus it is inborn in tender infants before the age of reason, and in particular animals which are even by nature furnished with weapons for defense against injuries. And since revenge is natural, it is also naturally pleasing, since it clears up the sad mind and clouded animus, refreshes and restores it to its natural condition, hatred being dissipated and envy extinguished. The pleasure of revenge is according to the degree in which hatred and particular envy had existed. But the desire of revenge is for the most part accompanied with sadness, unless the mind sees the possibility of obtaining its end, although in some minds the desire itself exhilarates the animus. 272. The general desire of revenge is similar to general envy, for it arises from the same source, and thus similar attributes belong to both. The latter is always united with a spurious ambition or with the love of self. The desire of revenge is never united with true ambition or with the universal love of the good, unless for the sake of the extirpation of evil. For zeal and righteous sorrow give birth to revenge, but still in the desire and in the revenge love remains. For it wishes to destroy the evil in order that after its destruction it may revive the good. Such is the divine vengeance. But the greater the love, the greater the desire of avenging evil, since love persuades to be like itself and to be united with itself. Whatever, therefore, disjoins and hinders the possession of the desired good, love hates and devours, and eagerly seeks to annihilate. And this often is accompanied with anxiety, grief, and unhappiness in the subject. Misanthropy, love of solitude. 273. Misanthropy is properly the hatred of the human race, or it flows from such a universal hatred, rarely from envy or from hatred mixed with anger, since this breathes vengeance, which presupposes life in society. Misanthropy is united with contempt, or privation of a sensibility of the pleasure of the body or of the delights of the animus. There are misanthropes who do not appear such, because they possess an animus desirous of pleasures which can only be indulged in company and in civil life, or by sociability. There are those also who from their esteem of reputation are unwilling to appear as misanthropes, but when once this desire and this love of fame ceases, they become such. They are for the most part extremely given up to self-love. This vice is very natural and inborn, for it arises sometimes from the ill success of some highest love, and thus from despair, since the highest love persuades that the only thing and the all in the universe is that which it loves, and this being lost it believes all to be lost. The misanthrope is regarded in society as nobody or as an abject. And this he deserves, since by his hatred he is separated from all. He is to be the more esteemed, indeed, if he separates himself than if he intermingles. For when he mixes with society, he injures others, but when alone, only himself. 274. There are misanthropes, special and particular, those, namely, who hold in aversion or hatred some special race, or nation, or family, or certain persons. If this proceeds from hatred and from the causes of hatred, if from aversion, and indeed a natural aversion, it is antipathy. If from what is acquired, it is from some presumed or real dissimilitude of principles and of loves, this also can be turned into antipathy, which remains in one's posterity. 275. The love of solitude is commonly believed to be misanthropy, because misanthropy loves to be solitary. But the love of solitude may have its origin in a great many other causes. It arises naturally from melancholy, when it is a disease sometimes curable, for then it inmostly desires to indulge its fantasies, and even extends these so far that it interests itself in particular things, in thought if not in the body. He also loves to be alone who is devoted to studies, especially those of a theoretical nature, and who chooses solitude lest the mind be disturbed, and he loves his studies and his solitude in equal measure. For that the mind may be at ease, it must, as it were, be separated from those things which excite the animus and the sensations of the body, and also the other loves of the mind. He also is accustomed to be solitary, who thinks all things to be only vanity, and himself alone not a vanity, or who desires to become secure from vanities, and therefore separates himself from society, as certain philosophers are wont to do, the chief of whom either laugh at all things or weep at all things. Those are solitary by zeal, and not by their nature, who sacrifice themselves to God, lest they be drawn away by worldly enticements, like the hermits, the most illustrious of whom are those who use force and violence in controlling the desires of their animus, and thus their bodies, and do this with the intent that they may go forth the more pure and holy. Cruelty. 276. Cruelty in general is the love of extirpating the human race, finding its highest delight in their anxieties, griefs, and pains. It flows from hatred and general misanthropy, and a supreme degree of self-love. For the subject of this love regards himself alone as the universe, and all those who are about him as opposing him, because he cannot alone exist. This love also arises from an extreme degree of love of the world, or it may be of honors, or from an extreme love of the good things of the earth, that is, of riches, thus from envy of a general kind. It is especially opposed to pity. What the character of cruelty is appears, therefore, from the face itself, thus whether it come from the love of self, or from the love of the world, or of the good things of the earth, and thus from hatred or envy toward those who possess these, seeing that he alone desires to possess them. This is the reason why cruelty is often hidden under a very honest face, but if it be exercised is likely to change into an aspect of hatred and revenge, and to end in madness. 277. In all revenge there is cruelty, for he who is desirous of revenge loves to have the one he hates tortured in mind and in body, and this according to the degree of his hatred. But the vengeance that arises from zeal and from a righteous displeasure loves to give pain, so far as this is the means of extirpating the evil, the love toward the person remaining all the while undiminished. The cruelty is the same whether it flows from one's own hatred or from that of another whom one loves as himself. It ascends according to the degree of the love. He who slays his enemies is not cruel, but he is cruel who ill-treats the conquered and those incapable of harm. Therefore, as is the vengeance, such is the cruelty. As is the hatred, such the vengeance. And as are the anger and zeal in the vengeance, such is the pleasure of this vengeance. 278. There is a certain correspondence between venereal love and cruelty, or between the love of propagating and the love of extirpating the human race. They are contrary in themselves, but they agree in the phenomena of their effects, as those contraries often do which come together in a third term, for otherwise the circle of their relation could not exist. Each of these loves excites the organs of the sensory, the fibers, the members of generation, and produces the generative substance, as is known from natural history. Hence it appears that the affection of cruelty is as delicious to perverted minds as is the venereal love to minds that are pure, for the one does not extinguish the other but excites it. Such would be the devil clothed in a human form. Clemency, 279. Clemency is the queen, and as it were, the goddess of virtues. Wherefore to be clement is to be not only kingly but divine, as the king by clemency emulates the deity. For true clemency is without hatred, without self-love, without envy, vengeance, anger, cruelty, or without any naturally unpleasant affection. It is always conjoined with love towards those to whom the clemency is exercised. Thus, united with tranquility of the animus, happiness of mind, and pity, love is always clement. From clemency the quality of the love may be known, and to whom extended. If it is the love of truth, there is clemency united with justice. If the love of honor and virtues, especially if it be the love of piety and veneration of the deity, the case is the same. 280. But if the love be that of vices, falsities, vanities, impiety, clemency will be exercised to the disadvantage of those by whose mutual love it is affected, and this clemency is spurious and unjust. Clemency is, for the most part, a natural trait, like patience, for he who is clement cannot be cruel. This clemency is opposed to cruelty, and from the description of cruelty the character of clemency may appear. But there is also an acquired clemency when cruelty is joined to fear but lies hidden, a snake in the grass. Clemency may be, therefore, both spurious and legitimate, thus a vice and a virtue. Intemperance, luxury, 281. Intemperance in general means all excess of the desires of the mind, of the lusts of the animus, of the delights and pleasures of the body, of the world and the good things of the earth. But intemperance in particular means excess in eating and drinking, as when we call it indulging one's appetite, sacrificing to Bacchus and Ceres, and caring for the belly. Every love and every pleasure is for the sake of the end that we may live a healthy life in a healthy body. Therefore the earth abounds in everything enabling us to enjoy these loves and pleasures, provided it be as means and not as ends. When we regard particular loves and particular pleasures as means, then we enjoy each in a temperate way and in a manner to attain the end. But when we regard these as ends and not as means, then we fall into excess, and the more ardently as we love the end. 282. Thus, intemperance denotes a perverse state of mind, very limited and material, which in a word confines its ends to very narrow limits. But the more elevated mind perceives that one thing is for the sake of another, and that there is a chain of means to a most universal end. Such a chain is the created universe, or the world, or terrestrial society, or our very selves. 283. There is nothing in our entire body which is not a means to some higher end. The last end is the soul, for the sake of which the body exists. The soul, which is the end of the loves of the body, is not the most universal end, but is an end intermediate to a more universal one. Nor do we conclude with anything short of the very deity of the universe, which is the end and the beginning of all things. 284. Therefore, since there is nothing which is not an intermediate end, it follows that there can be intemperance in all means which are assumed as ends. For all means in themselves are regarded as ends because they are distinct terms, but they are properly ends intermediate or intermediate terms. Therefore, to enumerate all kinds of intemperance and describe their cause, nature, and effect would be to review again all the affections of the mind, the animus, and the body. Anyone from the description of the affections may judge of their defect and excess. 285. This alone need be said, that all intemperance is contrary to nature, and what does violence to nature destroys either our mind or our animus or our body. Thus, when these are ruled by the will, and the will by desire, and the desire by loves, not as means but as ends, we rush into so many causes of destruction, whence is the death of the body. 286. But the virtues, honesty, perfection, spiritual happiness, these can never be intemperately desired and loved. For in the body we never shall be able to arrive at perfection itself, but the infinite will still remain beyond. But spiritual intemperance is to desire perfection more perfect than its own nature admits of being. Thus, as if the mind could become like the soul, or the soul like God, instead of being only most perfect in its own degree, and thus an image, type, and likeness of things superior. 287. The inferior form can never be elevated to the perfection of the superior form, unless by previous dissolution and its own death. Therefore we subsist still within the limits of temperance as long as we desire a more perfect state, however immoderately it may appear. Thus, so long as the mind desires intelligence and wisdom. Intemperance, therefore, is always a vice and not a virtue. Temperance, parsimony, frugality. 288. We learn what temperance is from the description of intemperance, that, namely, it is a moderate use of the delights and pleasures of the body, in order that these may be corresponding and proportionate means to ends. Thus, intemperance properly signifies excess, but it involves also a defect. For a defect in one regard does not exist without an excess in some other, as a defect in nourishing the body indicates an excessive economy. And there is besides an excess of avarice or of abstinence, which is equally injurious to the body. Therefore, a moderation in all things is itself temperance, but it is known by other names when reference is had to other objects. As temperance denotes moderation in eating and drinking, parsimony, moderation in spending wealth and the goods of the earth, while frugality has regard to domestic economy. So in other things. Meanwhile, inasmuch as temperance is a natural mediocrity, it is qualified according to the nature of anyone, wherefore the temperance of one is sometimes the intemperance of another, and so on. Therefore the measure and the scales of all the affections of the mind, as well as of the animus and of the body, of which we have thus far treated, is temperance, which is the preserver of all in order that there may be a sound mind in a sound body. In a word, explore that you may understand what is true and what is good, and regard all things as mediate ends, by which you may arrive at the ultimate end in continually inquiring. For what end? End of section 25.